The 7 jump. It is a powerful learning concept, which is the backbone of our tutorial process, which is the heart of our problem-based learning curriculum. Now, unfortunately, the potentials of these powerful learning concepts has not been fully realized, as we could see in some of the tutorials which we observed from previous years. My name is Yodi Mahendradhata, and in these next few minutes together, we will review the concept of 7 jump in order to be able to revitalize the practice within the tutorials of Block 4.2. Now, you might ask, why do this at this point of the curriculum, at the end of the 4th year? Now, here, let's start with the problems we see at hand, what we observed from previous tutorials. Here we see that as they approach the 4th year, many of the tutorial process becomes much quicker, much more efficient, because the student seemingly wants to get it over as quick as possible. And this can be done by several ways. We see in some instances, groups combine step 3 and 4, so you cannot actually see the distinctive feature of step 3 and 4. We also see frequently on the second meeting, there is no clear conclusions, it just ends. Yeah? And all leads to a much quicker process, but a much poorer learning experience. It seems that by the time they reach the 4th year, students are quite saturated by this tutorial process, so they just want to get it over as quick as possible. It seems that it has become lethargic and monotonous, which consequently makes the process becomes very much boring, and the learning process becomes poor, and also the memory retentions becomes very limited. That is why we feel in this Block 4.2, we need to revitalize the 7 jump. So, let's review these powerful learning concepts. It's a state of the art in terms of as far as learning goes. It's a discovery-based learning where students discover new things, and by that, it leads to stronger memory retentions. It has a strong theoretical base. For every single step, there are scientific rationales underlying it. And that's what we will do in these next few minutes. We will go through every steps and see what are the rationales behind it and what are the practical things that we will do in Block 4.2 to make sure that these steps reach its objectives. So let's go first to the first step, which is about clarifying unfamiliar terms. Here, the goal is simple, straightforward. That is for the students to understand scenario. And by this, we mean there should be no terms within the scenario that the students could not understand. So that's why during these steps, it's important for the students to identify all the difficult terms and try to get an understanding of what does these terms mean. Now, one important note is that Block 4.2 have long scenarios. So it's recommended to have a look at it briefly before the tutorial so it doesn't take long to read the entire scenarios. And what we would like to note for this particular process in Block 4.2 for this step, what we saw is that frequently the chair of the group would ask who among the students have some terms which they have difficulty understanding, and then after that ask who have some explanations and so forth. For Block 4.2, what we would like is that the chair ask every single student to come up with the terms which they find difficult. We want to give every student an opportunity to say what are the terms they have difficulties and also to try to explain the terms which their colleagues find difficult. Now, at this point, it's important to note that we don't want that from the very start, the discussion is dominated by those with a lot of voice, those who are more extrovert. We know about 30% of the group are introverts. So by giving a chance for everyone to say, we hope that everybody have a voice on it. And also to note that it's okay to end the steps with opening the dictionaries to make sure that all the difficult terms are well understood. We don't want anybody to go to the next step without having a clear understanding of the scenario. Okay? Now, then we go to this second step, which is the problem definition, in which the goal is that the student can define the core problem after having a thorough understanding. Now, so here we would like to emphasize that in this step, we are not going to answer the difficult terms in step 1. That should already be done in the previous step. And in this step, we're not going to make a long list of questions, 10, 20 questions. That's not the aim. What's most important on this step is for the group to agree, if possible, on one core problem, or maybe 2 or 3, if necessary, core problems. And what we mean by core problems are problems which leads to understanding of mechanisms, concepts, or theories. So in practical terms, these problems should start with either a why or a how, not with a what. Because if a problem starts with a why and a how, then it leads to an explanations of the mechanisms, of the concepts. But if you start with a what, it's mainly searching for facts, for information, and that's what we avoid. And in this particular steps, the keywords can usually help the students to formulate what are the core problems. Now, if the group is too accustomed to listing questions and grouping them, that's fine, as long as they don't just stop by saying, okay, we have 3 groups of questions. That's not what we want. If you have groups of questions, that what we would like to ask you to do is to label each of this group with a problem statement. Again, starting with a how or a why, so that they become core problems. That's what the tutor is aiming for. And that's what we mean by problem definition. Now we take step 3. So based with this understanding of the scenario and also having identified and agreed on the core problems, we will try to start responding to the problem. So here we go to the brainstorming phase, where the aim is not to resolve the problem. The aim is more to trigger prior knowledge of the students regarding these particular problems. So here again, we don't want the discussion to be dominated by those who have a louder voice or more active or more assertive. We want the chair to ask every single student to share what are their thoughts concerning the problem which have been identified, what are their responses. And here, there is no discussion. Whatever they say should be listed. No objections, no arguments whatsoever. This is brainstorming as it is. We don't mix it with step 4. Now, having a list of all of these responses, then we go to the 4th step, which is analyzing the problem. Now, here the goal is try to analyze the problem in depth. So here, the students began to connect the different ideas which were raised in step 3. And here you can argue. Here you can disagree. But for each disagreement, there must be a reason. And here also, perhaps you can identify topics or informations which requires some searching of references. So in practical terms, what the students need to do is to review the problems which were formulated in step 2 and then discuss in more details the response in step 3. Here you can ask, why do you have that particular response? What are the reasoning? And you can agree and disagree. And what we want at the end is to have a mind map. Yeah? So this step should end with a mind map, which shows how the different issues, the different ideas connects, and also the students need to identify what are the gaps within these mind maps which the students still cannot explain. So that's the end of step 4. And having that mind map with the gaps identified, you can move on to step 5, which is about formulating the learning issues. Here, the goal is to have learning objectives which are focused, achievable, comprehensive, and accurate. And also, this must be in line with the original objectives of the scenario. So this will end with a conclusion from the chair and a feedback from the tutor, just trying to make sure that all the important learning objectives are being identified. Now, what we would like to highlight here is that this does not end with distribution of learning objective among the group. This doesn't mean that if you have 10 learning objectives, then objective 1 and 2 goes to 2 or 3 students, and then 3 or 4 goes to another group of students, and so forth. That's not the idea. Because we, based on this learning objective, will move to the next step, which is for searching information, which is not group work. This is about individual learning. So everybody should try to answer all learning objectives based on the references, because the goal here is to build knowledge based on the result of the analysis or conclusion based on scientific evidence. Again, this is not group work. So if you have 7 learning objectives from the group, then each student should try to work on all 7 learning objectives and find information for those 7 learning objectives individually, not group work. Yeah? And just to highlight that we know that for this particular subject of health system and disaster, especially related to Indonesia, it's not always easy to find relevant information. That is why we have put together a specific website which should help you as a starting platform to get more information on health system and disaster based on the Indonesian context. For the health system one, there is this website which is www.kebijakankesehatanIndonesia.net. For the disaster one, there is the www.bencana/kesehatan.net. Within those websites, you should find up-to-date information on health system and disaster within Indonesian context, which might be a bit tricky to find in other resources. So, based on that, based on the learning, then we should move on to step 7, which here everyone comes back from the learning experience to be able to synthesize. Yeah? But to be able to get to the synthesis part, we must begin with a report from all of the students regarding what they learned. So here again, we do not want the chair just to ask, okay, who has responses to learning objective 1 or 2 or 3? We would like the chair to ask every single student one by one to report their learning by presenting briefly, say 5 minutes, either by using PowerPoints. You can use your laptop or your tab, or you can just make a small poster which you can put on the wall, handwritten poster, anything, any medium, which helps you to give a brief report of what you learned, every single one of the students. Yeah? So we don't want just to have 1 or 2 students sharing. We want to have every student sharing what they learned for all the learning objectives. Only after we have given all the students a chance, then we discuss. Then we start to try to synthesize based on the learning results on what we can conclude for each of the learning objectives. So then we end with a conclusion from the chair and also a feedback from the tutor should there still be some learning gaps. But at the end, what we want is that by these tutorials, the student have an understanding of the theories and concepts which is relevant for that particular scenario. So that concludes the review of our 7 jump for block 4.2. We hope by this review that all of us would be ready to revitalize the tutorial process for the sake of better learning. Let's get to work. Thank you.